project started, as Diana said, in January 2020. But the ideas for it were formulated in my mind for quite a long time beforehand. I had been inspired by the work that Mike was doing with the Welsh Refugee Council, and I teach creative writing, and in that role, I'm often giving prompts and playing games and trying to help students to access their creativity. I teach writing nonfiction, so I know that it's important to be able to tell your own story, and I have various strategies to help people tell their stories. So I wondered if the work that I was doing with the creative writing students could be somehow added to the work that was being done in ESOL classes. And then the idea of partnerships came together, and the idea of that we would partner local English speakers. And that didn't mean just people that were born in England and Wales. I had students from Poland and from the Czech Republic that were interested in doing this kind of work, and they helped out too, with a group of people that had been resettled in the Pontypridd area for about 4 years at that point, Mike. So the idea was to partner those people, put them into partnerships, and give them creative tasks to do. This is the first project. This is Speak to Me. In January 2020, we invited 16 people to come into the room. And from the moment they walked into the room, there were smiles and there was laughter and there was just a general, I just felt this kind of willingness to try new things. I didn't know what to expect. Oops, they didn't know what to expect. But there was just this kind of like openness, and it was wonderful. It was wonderful from the beginning. We were gifted with the fact that there were 4 people having a birthday that first night. So 4 people. So we turned it into a celebration. We brought in cake and candles and balloons, and we had a birthday party. The partners met each other for the first time, and they went off into their partnerships, and they talked to each other about the ways in which they like to celebrate significant events. And then kind of organically, they came back into a group like this. I'm not sure if this was the first night. And each of them told each other's story. So each of them told the story that they'd heard. And there were people in the room that were not at all confident about speaking English, let alone speaking English to a group of people. And yet everybody spoke. But more than that, everyone wanted to speak. And some of them spoke with the help of others, but they wanted to have their voices heard. And for me, that was what the project was about. The second week, because the cake had worked so well, I asked them all to bring in food. Can I just say at this point that in the first Speak to Me, I was confident enough to ask. I wanted to concentrate on what we have in common. I wasn't trying to get people to tell stories about their migration or their journey. I just wanted to concentrate on what we have in common. So I'm going to take you through some of the activities we did together just so you get a feel of what we did in the slides. So in that second session, everybody brought in food. I asked them to bring in food that meant something to them. So there were a lot of Welsh cakes. But there was also one of the participants who lived in Canada for quite a long time, so she brought in pancakes and maple syrup. And some of the Syrian women brought in platters of chicken and rice and vegetables and beautiful Mid-Eastern food that we all enjoyed. And it was chaos. It was absolute chaos, but it was also magic. It was working really well. So this was probably the next week where we did a session on what we were wearing. And we did a series of games and prompts about what we were wearing. And this picture makes me smile because you can see Beverly Humphries up there in the right-hand corner. Can you see her distinctive jacket? Well, Idris, who was standing next to her, so everybody had to describe someone else in the room by the clothes they were wearing. And Idris described her as Tom Cruise from Top Gun. And we all knew what he was talking about, or who he was talking about. And for me, that was language in a creative way. People using language in a creative way. And it was really, you could see it in that room that day. So in all of these sessions, there was a time for the partners to come together and talk about various topics. I couldn't control what they were talking about, but they talked a lot. And at the same time, just about at this point, we got some USW student sound technicians to come along and start to record these conversations because they they were so interesting. And I wanted to have a record of them. And and we also had a photojournalist from India who came in and took some pictures. So that's why we've got so many lovely pictures. So one week we had a friendship week in which I asked everybody if they would bring in trinkets and things from their houses that they didn't want anymore. We've all got stuff in our house that we don't want, right? So we put them all on the table, and each partner was asked to go and choose a gift for their partner. And they couldn't just choose a gift and give it to them. They had to tell the story to the whole group of why they chose that particular gift. And that was a really warm moment when you kind of saw that the partnerships were becoming friendships as well. There was a lot of warmth and laughter in the room that night. This is another picture of some of our partnerships talking, but the two artists who came along and decided to helped us to create an exhibition of this project are on either side of them. So that's Robert Orris, he's from Romania, and Marina Iodis, who's from Italy. And the student sound technicians that we were recording were from places like Hungary and Thailand and China, and the photojournalist, as I mentioned, was from India. And what I started to see in this room was English was being spoken, but from a real variety of places and from a variety of experiences. And this is the men's table. I've got nothing else to say about this slide except it's the men's table. It's funny how people just segregated it. You can see they're all having a good time. Sometimes the partnerships became groups of people, and they all had pens and paper, and they drew and they wrote. And we used all that in the exhibition later on. But, next slide. We were closed down by COVID. So it was a 6-week project, and COVID put an abrupt end to it. So as Diana mentioned in her introduction, I had learned that I didn't want to stop. This was good work, but I was learning so much from it as well and growing as a person, and my understanding was getting bigger, and I knew what I wanted to achieve. So we started an online group for women. That's when I met Ida. Okay. And it was an online group for women, and it was eventually, we called ourselves Cafe Chit Chat. We met once a week. It was the same format in that we'd all come into the room, we'd say hello to each other, we'd check in, and then I would set a task or a prompt or an idea, and partners would go into breakout rooms on Zoom and come, I'm looking at her because you remember, and coming back into the room, and then they would tell us what stories they had heard. And the next slide, shows that that sounds like the pandemic was really quick. We all know it wasn't quick. But when things started to open up again in 2021, we met in person, and this was the first time I met Ida and Henriette and Farah, and we had a birthday party, and you could see that it wasn't like the first time meeting. We knew each other really well by then. It was absolutely lovely. We also started to, I guess what the pandemic taught us was the value of being together. So Mike and I started to coordinate together, kind of in a loose way, some walk and talk outings. They weren't regular, they were now and again, and when we got some money really to support them. And so in the last year and a half, we walked up Penavan, we walked other parts of Brecon, we did a walk across the Cardiff Bay Barrage on a very wet day. Food has always been a part of everything we do. Even online we showed each other our food, didn't we? We were hosted by a group in Abergavenny to walk up Skirrid Bower. It's not as easy as it looks in that picture. It was quite a challenge, but we got to the top. There's Ida there. And it was, these things, the idea of walk and talk is to be outside, to be doing something, but also people are talking to each other. I speak to everybody on these trips, just go from person to person, and we've all become friends, haven't we? If you want to, sorry. And then I was very lucky to get some money from the university in the Bring Back Brilliantly fund that was out last year. And one of the things that it funded was a really lovely bus trip to London that happened actually last January. I have never had so much fun on a bus. I have never had so much fun or laughed so much on a bus. It was fantastic. We walked across the South Bank with some people who were very knowledgeable about the South Bank and were able to tell us about it. Becky was there and she told us about it. And we just had so much fun. It was a long walk. And even the bus ride back was fun, wasn't it? Okay. The Bring Back Brilliantly Fund also funded Speak to Me Too, which took place in Trinity Centre in Cardiff last spring. And you know what? I got braver. It was a different kind of group because it was in the daytime rather than in the evenings. It was more fluid, so I wasn't so worried about people being in partnerships, but we put people into groups. And because it was daytime, I think some people could come all the time, some people couldn't come at all, some people came when they could. So I had to be more fluid about it. But I also worked and co-coordinated this with Zainab Al-Jamal, who came on board as somebody who's got lived experience and someone who's an educator. And she came along with her ideas, and it just made the whole thing better. So we also had some money because of the Bring Back Brilliantly Fund. So the first thing that we did in that group was to have a laughter yoga specialist come in. And she did laughter yoga with us, which, as you know, is probably not using language very much, but it is a really good bonding experience. And we laughed and laughed and laughed. We also had Liz Coombs, who works here as a music therapist. She came along and did a music therapy session with us. One day we had a map. This was in the middle of Ramadan. We had a map and we talked about where we'd been and where we were going and our journeys. Suzanne Phillips, who's amazing and was here, she documented the whole project for a film that she made about the project. But she was there, she also became involved. She encouraged people to talk about the refugee experience and the migration experience in a way that I had never been brave enough to do. And I'm really thankful to you, Suzanne, for doing that. So you can see on the picture there are people drawing themselves and as a group deciding what it makes to be a successful refugee, good legs for walking, a good heart, a good heart for, being open to new ideas and stuff. And there were some lovely things in the room, and they also acted it out. So that's on the film that Suzanne produced, which was a lovely film as well. So that was a really nice project. This is just a picture of that exhibition that we finally had in September of 2021 when the world opened up again and we were able to use the gallery. And I wanted to show it to you because those brave people all stood up and spoke about what it had been like to be in the Speak to Me project. But not only that, you can see behind you the portraits that were made of the partners, which were made for us by the artists, and I wanted you to see that. So what's next? Everybody that took part in this, the feedback was that everybody gained from learning about each other's cultures. More than they. And from the English learners, from the refugees and asylum seekers, they said that they had found a confidence in speaking that they hadn't found in their traditional ESOL classes when they're learning grammar from a book. So Mike and I have just received some HEAP funding, we've got some HEAP funding to create and deliver some classes to ESOL teachers, which talk about the participatory work that Mike does in workshops and the creative part of this that I try to add to this. And we're delivering it from January next year, which I realize is next month. When I was doing this, that's next month. And we're going to trial it with third sector organizations like Oasis in Cardiff, which support refugees in this area, but also with Adult Learning Wales, who I think a lot of their work is about English language education now, isn't it? And they're crying out for this kind of training for their teachers to enhance what they do. And Mike and I think you'd agree with me, Mike, we're not trying to replace anything to do with traditional ESOL classes. What we're trying to do is just add to it and enhance it. So I want to thank you for listening to me. I'm going to leave you with this lovely quote by Ellie Baker, who was actually a first-year student when we started, and she's since graduated with a first-class degree, and that's her lovely quote. I'm going to give you a minute to read that. So thank you very much for listening to me.